So let's think about ghosting. What is it? What does it mean? Who ghosts? What do we call people who ghost? So ghosting is actually the practice of ending a personal relationship with somebody by suddenly, no explanation, just withdrawing from all communication. So just basically just disappearing. And that's probably why it hurts so much. But people tend to absorb it and feel that it's a reflection on them or it's saying something about them. But it's actually not, because it actually says absolutely nothing about what you're worth, and it isn't actually a reflection on you if somebody ghosts on you. So if somebody just disappears, it doesn't mean that there's something wrong or you've done something wrong. It just shows that that's their behaviour in response to their own situation. So the opposite of love isn't actually hate, it's actually indifference. Ghosting, for people who haven't yet experienced it and been fortunate enough not to experience it, is having somebody that you actually believe cares about you, whether it's a friend or somebody in a romantic sense, somebody that you're dating, just disappear from contact without any explanation at all. No phone call, email or a text. They've not told you why. Because if somebody tells you why, you could probably deal with it. You could probably think, well, okay, it's over. So you go through the process of grieving. But when somebody just disappears, you're actually left with no answers. So it isn't actually new. People have done it for a long time, disappearing acts. But years ago, this kind of behaviour was considered something that was limited to a certain type of a weak human being, a weak individual. But because of today's dating culture, online access, being ghosted is actually a phenomenon that about 50% of people have actually experienced, men and women. And an almost equal number have done the ghosting. So despite ghosting's commonality, the emotional effects can be particularly devastating, especially for people who might have a fragile self-esteem, heartache in their history. So the loss or grieving process is actually made much more traumatic and much more painful for them. So let's ask ourselves, let's think about, why do people actually ghost? People who ghost aren't often, they are often self-absorbed. They aren't often thinking about others around them. They can be selfish, and their primary focus is actually on avoidance of their own emotional discomfort. So their consideration isn't about how it makes the other person feel, it's more a case of self-preservation. They're only thinking of their own needs, emotions, and being unable to support their partner or the person they've ghosted on through the heartache. So because they actually don't want to face or acknowledge that. So the lack of social connections to people who meet online also means that the social consequences are less. So it's easier to drop out of somebody's life, and the more it happens to yourself, to people around you, and people can actually become desensitized to it, and they're more likely to actually do this to somebody else. So I think that people have, like, looking through the lens of maybe a coward, it's what sometimes makes them feel that they're actually being kinder, whereas it's the nicer option, rather than telling somebody or hurting somebody's feelings that you're not interested in that relationship, in that interaction, in that engagement, that it's easier just to disappear and leave you to it. So sometimes is there something about the online dating scene actually being more appealing. So there aren't any common friends, there wasn't an introduction, there wasn't another channel of communication. So if somebody does disappear, you're suddenly left with this void that there's absolutely no connection or links to. There's no network there to lean back on or fall back on. So lots of people talk about if they've felt that they've been ghosted on, that they sometimes feel that it's very, very cruel. But if you speak to somebody who has ghosted, they actually think that it justifies cruel behaviour. So how does it feel to be ghosted? For many people, ghosting can actually result in feelings of feeling disrespected, used, and feeling disposable. If you've known the person beyond more than a few dates, more than a few interactions, you've met them a few times, been texting, been calling, it can actually be even more traumatic because a dependency has been created. So when somebody that we care about or have developed feelings for, and we actually begin to trust, disengages, it can feel like a deep betrayal. You can feel like I have people say to me, I feel like an idiot, like I've been played for a fool. And the more so, I actually felt disrespected. So if we take all the romance out of it, to have a connection with somebody and then all of a sudden never hear from them again, it's actually painful and very, very disappointing, because nobody deserves to be blown off. It can feel like you've been punched in the gut, and it's the disregard that's actually insulting. The lack of closure actually makes you feel quite angry and frustrated and lost, really. So you move on, but unfortunately your self-esteem is how you feel about yourself. It takes a bit of a knock. So the only thing worse than being broken up with in any relationship is realising that somebody didn't actually consider you worth breaking up with. So you've gone from waking up in the morning and texting every day and seeing each other and making plans to nothing without the slightest hint of why, and that can be a kick in the gut for people. And some people can manage it and can move forward slowly, and others really take it as a real setback. So it's actually quite a cruel form of bad behaviour that dating can serve up. So let's think about and consider, why does it actually feel so bad? Social rejection can actually activate the same pain pathways in the brain as physical pain. In fact, you can reduce the emotional pain of rejection with medication, for example. But in addition to the biology of it, between rejection and pain, there are specific factors that actually contribute to the psychological distress. So that distress, ghosting doesn't actually give you a cue in terms of how to react. It's the same ultimate scenario of ambiguity. Should you be worried? What if they still need you? Or should you wait? Will this pass? Should you go through a grieving process and then find yourself back in that situation? Should you be upset? Maybe they're just busy, they're going to call you soon. Do you hope? You don't actually know how to react, because you don't actually know what's happened, you don't know what's going through their mind, because staying connected to others is so important to our survival that our brains evolved to have a social monitoring system. This monitors the environment around us for cues that we know how to respond in social situations, and these social cues allow us to regulate our own behaviour accordingly. But what ghosting does is deprive you of those cues that can create a sense of emotional dysregulation. So you feel a loss of control, because if somebody comes to you and says, I don't want to engage with you anymore, your social cues might be to say, I respect that, and you can move forward, but you're not actually given the information to process to move forward with. So one of the most insidious aspects of ghosting is it doesn't actually cause you to question the validity of the relationship that you had. It causes you to question yourself. So why didn't I see this coming? How could I have been such a poor judge of character? And what did I actually do to cause this? How do I protect myself from it happening again? So this self-questioning is the result of basic psychological systems. They're in place to monitor our own social standing and rely on the fact that information comes back to us via our own feelings of self-worth and self-esteem. So when rejection occurs, your self-esteem can drop, which social psychologists propose is meant to be a signal that your social belonging is actually low. But if you've been through multiple ghostings, or if your self-esteem is already low, you're likely to experience that rejection as even more painful, and therefore it takes you longer to get over it, as people with lower self-esteem have less sort of like natural protection released into the brain after that rejection when compared to people whose self-esteem might be higher. So ghosting is the ultimate use of silent treatment, and is a tactic that's used with people as a form of emotional cruelty, really, which essentially renders you to be powerless, leaves you with no opportunity to ask questions or be provided with information that would help you emotionally process the experience. So it actually silences you and prevents you from expressing your emotions and being heard. And you need that, because it's important to be able to express emotions to maintain self-esteem. So how do we actually move forward? The important thing to remember is that when somebody ghosts you, so it actually puts you in a position where you actually have to self-reflect and actually have to think about what your responses are. When somebody ghosts you, you actually have to think about all these things and start to question things, but it doesn't actually say anything about you or your worthiness for love or everything, but it does say everything about the person who does the ghosting. It shows that they don't have the courage to deal with the discomfort of their emotions or your emotions. They didn't understand the impact of their behaviour, or worse still, they didn't actually care. So in any case, they've sent you an extremely loud message that says, I don't have what it takes to be in a mature, healthy relationship with you. So sometimes we have to be the better person, and despite the fog, despite the lack of answers, actually retain dignity and let them go peacefully. So, in a nutshell, don't allow somebody else's bad behaviour rob you of a better future by losing your vulnerability and closing doors on yourself and shutting yourself off. Keep your positive energy focused on doing what makes you happy, and know that if you're someone who treats people with respect and integrity, then the person who ghosted simply wasn't on your wavelength, and you can keep your focus forward.